I reminded him that I had tried to wake him up earlier, and his alarm had been blaring too. Now please eat your breakfast, I said as he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the dining table. He immediately started complaining about the eggs. Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over, he demanded. I was caught hanging laundry and tried to hold back my irritation. Then don't eat it, I snapped. Why would you say that? And this coffee is scorching hot. Mom always got the eggs and coffee just right. All right, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hurriedly but left his plate on the table, rushing towards the restroom. Wait up, you should clean up after yourself. Jihan short on time, he called back, dismissing his responsibility, even though the breakfast delay was his fault. Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to clean up the dishes. While I was picking out my outfit, he called out again. Grace, over here. Help with my tie. There he stood, the tie hanging limply around his neck, looking utterly helpless. Seriously? You can't even tie your tie? What did you do before we got married? Mom always did it, he replied sheepishly. With a deep exhale, I knotted his tie, and somehow, we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never helped with any housework, and it felt like I was juggling everything and babysitting him too. Every time an issue arose, it was always, Mom did it this way, or with Mom, it went like that, always referencing his mother, Michelle. This routine dragged on for a year, and as the pressures mounted, thoughts of divorce began to creep into my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my mind, tempering my frustrations. However, an unexpected hiccup at work led to my being assigned a week-long business trip starting the next day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly surprised. Hold up, a business trip for a whole week? It's out of my hands. Work's calling, I explained. No way, who's going to cover for you here for a week? He asked, irritation seeping into his tone. You'll have to step up. It's about time you got a grip on the household duties, I responded. At that, he set down his controller and locked eyes with me. Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband and the house? Are you just bailing on that? His question dripped with outdated expectations. Seriously? That's such old-school thinking. We both have jobs. We should be a team. I don't see it that way, I countered. Well, Mommy was always on top of things at home, he retorted. I couldn't help but point out, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, it's kind of odd to hear an adult man constantly talking about his mommy. He bristled at this. What's your deal, taking shots at me and my mom? I'm not, but let's be real. You're a mama's boy. This is how you see me? You think you can talk to me like that? His defensiveness escalated, but I had reached my limit. Face it, you're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help, can't even tie your tie, and won't lift a finger around the house. You're constantly comparing me to your mom. For once, handle your stuff. Really? You're going to come at me like that? That's why I was iffy about marrying someone older. I should have sided with Mommy and chosen a younger, perkier girl, he shot back. His words struck a nerve, and our conversation spiraled into a major blowout. Even joking, you shouldn't say stuff like that. We're married, I said, trying to anchor the conversation to the commitment we had made to each other. The tension between us was palpable, revealing the deep rifts that have formed in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated argument, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, You can't possibly want a divorce, can you? You wouldn't want to be labeled divorced. And think about what your dad said about sticking together. But then he sharply added, Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously considering a divorce. With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the idea of divorce lingered in my mind, something I had previously struggled with, as I didn't want to disappoint my parents. Yet now, it seemed like a viable option to contemplate seriously. With these heavy thoughts, I went to bed. Bright and early the next day, I was up preparing for my trip. The fallout from our argument was still fresh and weighing on me, but I had work commitments to attend to. I nudged Edward, who was still nestled under the covers. I'm heading out. You better wake up or you'll be late for work. His response was a sleepy, unintelligible mumble. Rolling my eyes, I left. A few hours later, a text from him popped up on my phone. You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip? I quickly texted back, I did wake you up, and yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week. He read my message but didn't reply. Mid-trip, I decided to call my parents to update them about Edward's behavior and share my growing inclination towards divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, unsure of how they would react to the possibility of our marriage ending. The call was going to be a difficult one, but it was necessary to seek their advice and perhaps their understanding of my situation. Their response took me by surprise. We had no idea he behaved like this. Take your time to think, but don't force yourself to stay in a situation that isn't right. Always remember, we are in your corner, no matter what you decide. Their words of unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my business trip, I knew a serious conversation with Edward was inevitable. If he didn't show signs of change, I was ready to consider divorce more seriously. My mind was abuzz with thoughts as I walked into our house late in the evening, only to find Edward wasn't home yet. As I looked around, a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table caught my attention. The note read, "Since you ditched the housework, I'm heading back to my folks. Check out the divorce papers and think things over." Reading this, my initial reaction was rage. How dare he threaten me with divorce? But as my anger subsided, I began to see the situation differently. Maybe this was a sign that ending things might not be such a bad idea after all. With that realization, I decided to file the papers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That evening, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The next morning, as I enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, the door swung open, and in walked Edward, clearly upset. "Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's gotten into you?" he demanded, his temper flaring. Then, noticing the empty spot where the divorce papers had been, his expression shifted from anger to shock. "Hold on, where are the divorce papers?" "Oh, I filed them," I calmly responded. "You did what?" He looked as if he had been slapped. "You went through with it." "Thanks for signing them. It made everything smoother," I said. "You can't be serious. Did you go all the way? Have you lost your mind?" he exclaimed, unable to hide his astonishment at my decisiveness. Seeing how composed I remained, he lost his cool completely. "That's it. I'm calling my parents." "Sure, knock yourself out," I replied, undisturbed by his threat, knowing I had made the right decision for myself. An hour after the confrontation with Edward, his parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment. Michelle immediately spotted me and dramatically exclaimed, "You! How could you just divorce Edward like that? What's your deal?" I responded coolly, "If he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready to go, doesn't that suggest he wanted out? Is that a problem?" "How can you be so bold when you're just his wife?" she countered, but before the situation could escalate further, Arthur intervened with a firm "enough." The room fell silent. Arthur turned to me. "Grace, can you walk us through what happened?" I agreed and began detailing the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went with it, I explained, maintaining eye contact with Arthur. After a moment of consideration, Arthur was about to speak when Edward interjected, "Mommy, Dad, come on. Can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off." Michelle quickly sided with Edward. "Oh, Edward, my poor baby. She's so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now." "There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now," I stated firmly. Michelle's face turned red and she opened her mouth to respond, but once again, Arthur cut her off. "Zip it, Michelle." He then apologized to me for Edward's behavior. Turning to Edward, whose eyes were bulging with surprise, Arthur continued, "You bonehead. I knew you had issues, but this is next level. Using divorce papers as a threat? Unbelievable. You had it coming." Michelle tried to interject, but Arthur didn't let up. "It's partly on you, Michelle. You spoiled him. Watch out. If you keep this up, I might divorce you too." The tension in the room was palpable as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle at a loss for words. After the intense discussion, Michelle was visibly shaken, her thoughts lingering on the unexpected threat of divorce from Arthur. She murmured to herself, visibly troubled. As Arthur turned his attention back to me, his expression was marked by sincere regret. Grace, I deeply regret the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's clear he has a lot to learn. Please move on and find happiness in your life, Arthur implored with genuine concern. Thanking Arthur for his understanding, I watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It wasn't long before the news spread throughout our circle. Arthur had decided to cut financial and emotional ties with his son, a drastic step meant to push Edward towards self-sufficiency. Edward's life took a downward spiral shortly thereafter. He moved into a modest, somewhat neglected apartment, his first time living truly by himself. The transition was far from smooth. His new home quickly descended into chaos, a visible representation of his disorganized personal life. With no one to depend on and habitual tardiness, Edward soon found himself unemployed, his inability to adhere to a schedule finally catching up with him. Simultaneously, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always been intricately involved in Edward's personal affairs, overstepped boundaries one too many times, which led to a serious fallout with Arthur. Ultimately, this resulted in a separation. Michelle ended up moving in with Edward, each of them struggling to find stable footing. They scraped by with low-end jobs, their lives marked by a series of unfortunate events and poor decisions, with no clear path to improvement visible. On the other hand, my own life took a markedly different turn. Free from the daily stresses and emotional drain of my relationship with Edward, I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt surprisingly spacious and full of potential. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself to my career. The absence of Edward's negative influence allowed me to excel at work, and my professional life flourished as a result. Feeling liberated and optimistic, I embraced my newfound independence. My living space not only felt more open but became a true sanctuary where I could relax and plan for the future. The improvement in my work life was palpable, and I approached each day with a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. The contrast between my thriving existence and the downward trajectory of Edward and Michelle's situation was stark. While they were no longer a part of my life, the lessons learned from our time together resonated deeply, reinforcing my commitment to personal growth and happiness.